welcome back to Planet 40k. We got another video for you, and this time we're going to be looking at the Ctan Shard of the Nightbringer. So we're going to be checking out some tactics for the Ctan Shard. So before actually getting into the datasheet, we need to look at the Dynastic Agent and Star God's ability, as this is going to affect your Ctan Shards. So Ctan Shards can't get any bonuses from the Dynasty codes. However, it's not going to interfere with any of the other units that are within that code, so they can still get their code just fine. So it's not going to interfere, it's not going to stop them from getting that code. And then finally, you can only take one Ctan Shard per detachment. Now you can have multiple detachments to get more Ctan Shards within your list, but for every single detachment, you've got a maximum of one single Ctan Shard. So that being said, let's move on to the datasheet. So this is an elite model. It's coming in at 19 power level or 370 points. So it's quite a big chunk of your army list. 370 points is kind of like Lord of War standard really, but it is an elite selection, not a Lord of War model. So stat wise, it's got a movement of 8 inches, weapon skill and ballista skill value of a 2+, strength and toughness is 7, wounds 9, attack 6, leadership 10 and a 4+ armor save. So for me, there's two stats of note that are worth checking out here. The first one being the movement. Now I've got a bit of a problem with the movement of a Ctan Shard. It's only 8 inches. Now you might think that's plenty, but when we're talking about a model of this caliber, it needs to be chasing down units such as Mortarion, Magnus the Red for example, and those are much quicker units, much quicker characters, so they've always got the jump on our Ctan Shard, and really they should never be getting charged by our Ctan Shard if they're positioned correctly. So 8 inches for me isn't enough. Then the next thing is the wounds being 9. That is actually really key. I would like to have seen it being a little bit more. 10, 11, even 12. 9 is a very crucial number, and you're going to see why when we get onto the abilities section. So before getting onto those abilities, let's check out the keywords. So the keywords that it's got the monster keyword. So it's not an infantry unit, it is a monster. It's got the character keyword, although that won't make too much of a difference, you'll see why in a bit. It's got the fly keyword, which is kind of handy, especially for making those charges over terrain or just getting over screens and whatnot. And then of course it's got the Ctan Shard keyword, so that's going to interact with some stratagems. Again, we're going to go over that later in this video. So let's move on to those abilities then. The abilities it's got Living Metal, so it regains a lost wound at the start of the turn, which is actually very handy for this kind of model. Again, you're going to see why in a moment. It could actually be really crucial for keeping this thing alive. It's then got the Necrodermis ability, so it's got a 4+ invulnerable save, which is pretty nice, so it's always got a 4+ regardless. But the best part of the Necrodermis ability is it can only lose 3 wounds per phase. Now that does have its strengths as well as its weaknesses. The strength of course being if you're going up against say a Bloodthirster for example, that Bloodthirster can only put a maximum of 3 wounds onto your Nightbringer. So you can throw him into the deep end, he's only going to lose 3 wounds in that given fight phase. Now the weaknesses of this ability is not so much the ability itself, there's so many factions these days that can throw out mortal wounds and other kinds of damage in other phases other than the shooting phase and the fight phase. So of course you've got the psychic phase, especially if you're going up against Tyranids, Grey Knights, that sort of thing. Then there's other shenanigans with the movement phase and even the morale phase for some factions as well. So he can be got at in other phases, not just the shooting phase and the fight phase. If it was just the shoot phase and the fight phase, you're only going to lose a maximum of 6 wounds per turn. Then Living Metal on top of that to get yourself back to 4 wounds. And furthermore, you've got to think of the charge phase. If you're going for a charge and the opponent chooses to overwatch against your Nightbringer, that's a complete separate phase to the fight phase. So you could potentially lose 3 wounds there too. But really his weakness is really the psychic phase, that's the main one. There's quite a lot of factions that have the psychic abilities, Smite for example. So his next ability is Enslaved Star God, so he can't take a Warlord trait, he can't take a Relic, and he cannot use the Lookout Sir ability, which actually really sucks for us Necron players because we would like to have the Lookout Sir ability on him and maybe a little bit overpowered if he got it to be honest. But he can be got at, even with other units around him, so you can't really screen him. The only way you're going to protect him is within obscuring terrain perhaps, get him out of line of sight, take away those shooting lanes if you're going up against Tau for example. That's the only way you're going to keep him up and running until he gets into an actual fight. He's then got Reality Unravels, which is basically it explodes when he's destroyed. On a roll of a 4+, units within 6 inches are going to suffer D3 mortal wounds. So it's sort of a last hurrah before he dies. Not the worst thing, especially when he's not going to be in your deployment zone by the time he dies. He should be far into your opponent's half at the very least. So he should be blowing up against units that are not belonging to you. The final ability is Drain Life, which is absolutely magnificent. It effectively makes your opponent not be able to use any Feel No Pain saves against any attacks made by your Nightbringer. That's going to combo really nicely with his weapon, you're going to see that in a moment. But that rule in itself, removing Feel No Pain saves, that's really decent. There's so many characters that have got a Feel No Pain save, or a catalyst save from the Tyranids again, you're just removing all that jazz. Okay, we're going to talk about the powers of the Ctan in a moment. First, let's go through his weaponry. So he's only got one weapon, which is the Scythe of the Nightbringer. It comes in 2 profiles and both are melee options. Now the first one is the Reaping Sweep. It is strength user, making it strength 7. It's -3 AP and it is 1 damage. But instead of being able to make 6 attacks against the opposing unit, you're going to have double the amount of attacks. So you're going to have 12 attacks at strength 7. So really good against clearing out chaff units. Units that you just want to get out the way, screen units, things like that. It could be a unit of Termagants, maybe it's some drones. Getting rid of that screen before you get into the juicy stuff. The second profile is the Entropic Blow profile. This is its big beastie weapon. It's strength ×2, making it strength 14. It's -4 AP and the damage is D6. However, there is a special ability associated with this weapon, and simply no invulnerable saves can be made against the weapon. So what does that mean? Well, it's got a -4 AP already, so unless the model's got a 2+ armor save, they're not going to have any save whatsoever, because if you remember from the ability section, Drain Life removes any feel no pain saves, so it's going to have no invulnerable saves, it's going to have no feel no pain saves. So if it does have that 2+ armor save which goes to a 6+, that's the only save it's got. Any armor save that's worse than a 2+, it simply will not get a save whatsoever. And this is going to be really good because you're hitting on 2s, you're likely going to be wounding on 2s with a lot of dice, so it's going to be doing a lot of damage, even though it is D6, which is unreliable at times, but when you've got the quantity there, you should expect a lot of damage to go through. So that's the datasheet all wrapped up. Let's now move on to the powers of the Ctan. So before the battle actually begins, the Ctan Shard actually gets to select a power of the Ctan, and then he already knows one automatically as well, which is his own individual Ctan power, which we're going to go over now. So these are going to be used at the end of the movement phase, so they're not in the psychic phase. Some people get that confused. It is in the end of the movement phase. So let's start with the one that's unique to the Nightbringer. So this one is called Gaze of Death. And very simply, you select a unit within 9 inches of your Nightbringer, you then roll 3 dice, and any 4+ rolls, that unit will suffer D3 mortal wounds. You've got the potential of doing 9 mortal wounds there if you roll really high. Maybe you don't do any mortal wounds if you roll really poorly. But the key part of this is you get to select your unit, as opposed to having it being the nearest enemy unit. So that could be a character model, for example. Now this isn't a shooting attack, so there's no Lookout Sir available to the opposing player. This is purely a power of the Ctan Shard within the movement phase. So that's the one that he comes stock with. You then get to select one from the 6 of the following Ctan Powers. So we're going to go through them with you now. So the first one being Antimatter Meteor. So this one you roll 1 single dice, and if the result is a 3, 4 or 5, the closest visible unit that is within 24 inches of your Ctan Shard will suffer 3 mortal wounds. And if you roll a 6 for that roll, they're going to be suffering D3 + 3 mortal wounds. So again, this could be targeting a character. So this one is now the closest enemy unit. So if there's a screen in front of that character model, it only needs to be 1 model. You're not going to be able to target that character. This one's more used for elite models, tougher models. You don't have to roll to wound for it, of course. So you're basically just doing that roll, throwing out mortal wounds, hoping for a 6 if you can, getting D3 + 3 mortal wounds with the potential of 6 mortal wounds there. Now the second one available is the Times Arrow. And you're selecting one enemy unit within 18 inches of your Ctan Shard, and then you basically roll a dice. If it equals or exceeds the wound characteristic of any models within that unit, then that model is going to be removed from play. So for example, if you target a Terminator unit, they usually got 3 wounds. If you roll a 3 or more, you're simply going to remove a Terminator just like that. This one doesn't have to be the closest, they've just got to be visible, so it can be targeting a character. Again, there's no Lookout Sir here. However, those characters usually have a lot more wounds. For example, if they've got 5 wounds, you need to roll a 5+ to remove the model. Sometimes it is worth the risk. It is only 1 single Ctan power after all. So the third one in the list is Sky of Falling Stars. So you're selecting 3 units that are within 24 inches of the Nightbringer. They've got to be completely different units. And if you roll a 1, 2, 3, 4 or a 5, and that result is less than the amount of models within that enemy unit, then they're going to simply suffer D3 mortal wounds. So yet again, you've got the potential of doing 9 mortal wounds, but this time it's going to be on 3 different units, so it's going to be the potential of 3 on one, 3 on another, and 3 on another one. Best served on units that have got 6 models, because then you're definitely going to roll less than that. Of course, if you roll a 6, you fail anyway. You've got to roll between a 1 and a 5. So for example, if one of the units you select is a 5-man intercessor squad, you roll a 3. You're going to be doing D3 mortal wounds to that unit, likely going to be removing a single model. But you're going to be doing that on 3 different units, so it's just removing little models here and there. So you've got option 4, which is Cosmic Fire. So any unit within 9 inches, so that's any unit, that's a big bubble there. That could be just one enemy unit, it could be 6 enemy units, whatever is in that 9-inch radius is going to get affected with the Cosmic Fire. And you simply roll a d6 for all those units within 9 inches, and on a 4+, the unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. So the potential for this one is much greater. You can have an unlimited amount of units that are within 9 inches. Of course, they've got to fit in 9 inches in order to use it. They don't need to wholly be within 9 inches. You can literally just tag one model from each unit. If you're really lucky, you could be tagging quite a lot of units here. Now d3 isn't going to be a massive amount, so you don't want to be doing this on vehicles and stuff. It's just going to be pinging off 1 or 2 models from each unit. It's not going to be the most effective, don't get me wrong, but it is skimming off lots of models within units again. Just like the power we just previously done, Sky of Falling Stars, it's just chipping away at models and units. So number 5, we've got Seismic Assault. So you're selecting one unit within 18 inches of your Ctan shard, and for every single model within that unit you get to roll a d6, and any 6s that are rolled will inflict a mortal wound. So this one is your anti-horde Ctan power. If you've got a 30-man Orc Boy unit, you can throw this off. On average you're going to score about 5 mortal wounds. Now there is a cap on this, it's a maximum of 10. I don't think you're ever going to get 10 if I'm honest. There's not really a unit big enough, but if you roll crazy good, then yeah, maybe you can get 10. But it's mainly used for horde units. Then number 6 is Transdimensional Thunderbolt. So you're selecting one enemy unit within 24 inches of your Ctan shard. They've got to be visible, and if that model is a character with 9 wounds or less, if there's a model within 3 inches of it, you simply can't target that character model. Then very easy, on a 2+, that unit's going to suffer d3 mortal wounds. And then furthermore, any units that are within 3 inches of that selected unit, on a 4+, they're going to suffer a mortal wound. So you've got the opportunity of doing d3 mortal wounds to the selected unit, and then a single mortal wound to any units nearby within 3 inches. Now even though you can't select a character that's got units within 3 inches of it, you can actually select the unit that's bodyguarding that character to begin with, and then you can sprout off that single mortal wound to the character model. There's no lookout surf for the actual thunderbolt that comes off of the first target, so you can target the characters that way without any restriction. Okay, so that's the Ctan Powers all dealt with. Now let's move on to the roles within the game. So for me, he's got 3 main roles within a game. The first role is you're catapulting him towards the biggest and baddest, scariest model that's within your opponent's list. Maybe they've got a Swarm Lord, maybe they've got a Wraith Knight, whatever is the biggest and baddest enemy unit, you're going to be throwing your Ctan shard straight at them. Because he's ignoring invuln saves, and he's also ignoring those feel no pain saves, on a -4 AP, you're going to be slicing and dicing virtually anything he gets his hands on. So you want to be taking out the biggest, maybe the most expensive unit that your opponent has. That's the main one. Number 2, using him as a huge distraction. Now it's quite a costly distraction at 370 points, but your opponent has to deal with it. It causes so many mortal wounds with its powers, and then if it does get into combat, it's going to be cutting anything it gets hold of, as already mentioned. So your opponent has got no choice but to deal with this ticking time bomb that's literally approaching their lines. So this is going to aid you, because as a Necron player, maybe you're playing the Mephrit Dynasty, you don't want your Doomsday Arcs and your Doomstalkers getting targeted early on, or any other code that you're playing, you don't want your bulk of your army getting targeted, the ones that are scoring you your primaries and your secondaries. That's what the Necron Codex does best. It's actually very good at scoring points. It might not be the best at tabling your opponent, but it does score points very well, especially in the Nihilak Dynasty, Eternal Conquerors. So you want to be getting that down nice and early, let your opponent have to deal with a Nightbringer. Then the final one is just dishing out mortal wounds. It kind of relates to the first one really. Not many factions can actually deal with mortal wounds, and it's a sure way of actually putting damage out without anyone having an invuln save to stop your damage from actually happening. So your Nightbringer is really good at that. Again, we've gone through all those powers of the Ctan Shard. While he's on his way moving up the board, he's throwing out all these powers left, right and centre. Okay, so we're on to the stratagem part of the video. There's 3 stratagems available for the Nightbringer. The first one is Strange Echoes. And very simply, for 1 command point in your command phase, so don't forget it, it is in your command phase very early in your turn, you can pretty much just swap out one of your powers that it knows for one of the powers that it doesn't know. So maybe you've got into enemy lines and you've got lots of enemy units around you. You might quite fancy the Cosmic Fire Ctan Power, which is all units within 9 inches are going to take some damage. Whereas the Times Arrow, maybe not as useful now in this situation, so you're going to swap it out for a command point, very easily done, and then you're going to score more mortal wounds in doing so. The next one is Dimensional Destabilization. It's 1 command point again, and you use it when you're doing your power, so it's the end of the movement phase. For 1 command point, you simply get to do an additional power. Now it is random, you don't get to select it, You roll a dice, use the Ctan Powers table, and that dice roll will correlate to which power you're going to get to use. Now it doesn't always work. Again, for example, if you roll that Cosmic Fire one, which is only 9 inches, and you're say 24 inches away, it's going to be no good. So there is a little bit of risk involved, but the chances are you're going to get something that's decent, and you're going to throw out a bit of extra mortal wounds to your opponent. Now number 3 is Entropic Strike. It's 2 command points used in your fight phase, and you're pretty much just removing invuln saves from your opponent. Now the Entropic Blow profile that the Nightbringer has with his scythe already has this ability in place. However, the Reaping Sweep profile, the one where you got double the amount of attacks, so you got 12 attacks, that does not have the ignore invuln saves. So if you wanted to still ignore invuln saves with that profile, this is what you would do. You would use this stratagem. Don't forget the Drain Life ability is still in play as well, because that's just a natural ability he has. So you're going to be removing all the saves. Now this is going to work really well against, for example, Gene Stealers or Demons. Weak units that have still got an invuln save. Normally they've got a 5+ save. You've got Weak Sisters of the Battle with a 6+ armor save. You've got some Eldari that have got a 6+ invuln save. So this is a better profile to use, and the stratagem is going to remove that invuln save and maybe wipe out an entire unit. Okay, the next part of the video, we usually talk about the dynasty codes, but he's a dynastic agent. He's not going to have a code. He's not going to have any of the abilities relating to any codes. So we're going to skip ahead to the deployment. Now there's 2 ways to deploy him in my opinion. The first one is just front and center. It's the more riskier of the two. You're going to be putting him at the front. Hopefully you've got some line of sight blocking terrain so you can hide him at the very least. Maybe obscuring terrain, that's even better. And he does have a little bit of help from the new balance update with the indirect fire weapons. They're going to have a worsened ballistic skill and also a worsened AP as well. So thankfully those Hive Guard, for example, they're not going to be shooting at your Ctan Shard from behind obscuring terrain anymore, or not as efficiently as they used to anyway. Now the risk involved in putting your Ctan Shard front and centre, they can use Smite, they can use Psychic Powers, they can shoot him, maybe they can even make the charge on him and finish him off before he's even made his points up. However, putting him in the centre is going to be a huge threat, it's going to be a huge distraction. They're going to have to deal with it, and if they don't deal with it efficiently enough, you're going to be able to select your target because you're in the centre of the battlefield. Now this works better when you're not going up against a psychic army because they've not got the psychic phase to remove 3 mortal wounds from you. So they're really relying on the shooting phase and the fight phase. Maybe it's Tau, for example, then they're not even relying on the fight phase either, it's just the shooting phase. But for example, if you're going up against Thousand Suns, Tyranids, it's not likely to survive in this way, so you're better off doing option 2, which is putting them into strategic reserves. Now this is going to cost you 2 command points because it's 19 power level, but it is definitely worth it. Now there are some pros and cons to doing so, and we'll go over that now. So the pros of doing it this way is, of course, the main thing is protecting him. He can't be got at before he's even entered the battlefield. He's coming in needing a 9-inch charge. He's also getting to select his target, which is also really key. Your opponent does not know where he's coming in. He's going to be coming in off any of the flanks, not your opponent's deployment zone unless it's turn 3, but you probably want to get him in turn 2 because you want to be using those Ctan Powers nice and early. That is the downside of doing this. You're going to miss turn 1 of Ctan Powers. That's the disadvantage of doing it this way. You're not going to be able to use those Ctan Powers in the first turn. However, as soon as you do come on, you will be able to use them because you're coming on at the end of the movement phase, and the Ctan Powers are also used at the end of the movement phase. So you're using those powers as soon as you enter. You're 9 inches away. 9 inches isn't the easiest charge, don't get me wrong, but you would have had to survive at least 1, maybe even 2 turns of shooting when you're flying up the board. So this way just gives them a little bit more protection, and your opponent has got to scream for it as well. It's going to make your opponent think twice about their deployment and their movement, not knowing where the Nightbringer is going to come on. But what I like most about option 2 is we kind of briefly mentioned it already in this video. If you're going up against, say, Mortarion or Magnus, those big bads of other armies, they're much quicker. Some of them move 12 inches, some of them move 16 inches. Chasing those big characters down is really difficult when you've got a model that only moves 8 inches. They're just going to simply move away. It's going to be a wild goose chase and you're never actually going to get them. Whereas if you're coming on and making that 9-inch charge, you've got them, you're fighting first because you've made the charge move, and you've got a very high chance of actually removing that model. So that's the deployment all dealt with. Let's move on to the synergy. Now, not much synergy here, unfortunately, because he's a dynastic agent, and a lot of abilities within the codex require them to be in the same dynasty as the character giving out the buffs. However, there are a couple of characters within this codex that will link with the Ctan Shards. Now the first one is Orokin the Divine, and with his Master Chronomancer ability, he allows models within 9 inches to reroll their charge rolls. Now normally the Chronomancers have to have the same dynasty code, but Orokin works on all Necron models, whether they're in a different dynasty code, whether they're a dynastic agent, he gives that model reroll to their charge roll. Now he also gives a 5+ invuln save. The Nightbringer doesn't need it, he's already got a 4+. A reroll to the charge roll is doable when you're using Orokin. Now Orokin, to be honest, isn't really the most used character within the codex. Probably one of the worst ones if I'm honest with you. But if you wanted to give him the reroll to the charge roll, that's the way to do it. The second bit of synergy, although it is a little bit more indirect this time, is having a Plasmancer. Now Plasmancer is another way to throw off lots of mortal wounds with his abilities. He's got a couple of different abilities that can do mortal wound damage. Also use the Dimensional Sanctum Cryptic Arcana so he can get into the right position. And between the two of them, they can be throwing out a lot of mortal wounds. Now that isn't direct synergy, but if you're planning on just throwing out mortal wounds to certain units, you pair them up together, they're going to do that just fine. So before giving my final thoughts and all that stuff, I just wanted to do a couple of comparisons. One with the Deceiver and one with the Void Dragon. Both of them are also Ctan shards, but both of those options are actually 20 points cheaper than the Nightbringer. I just wanted to go through some of the stats and a few of the differences between them all. So out of the three models, the Nightbringer is the only one that's got a natural strength 7 in their characteristic, although the weapons with the Void Dragon do go up to strength 9, but then you can argue that the Nightbringer goes to strength 14. There is a bit of difference there between their melee strength. The Nightbringer also has the most attacks out of all three of them, with 6 naturally, the others only have 5. Then the Void Dragon's got a better armor save, it's got a 3+ armor save as opposed to a 4+. So slightly better in terms of resiliency. He's also on a bigger base, so he's more likely going to be making the charge roll off because he's much bigger, whereas the Nightbringer's only on a small base. I think it's a 40mm base. You've got to do a lot more work getting into combat. But for me, the Nightbringer's got the most flexible weapon out of all of them. Okay, the Void Dragon's got some nice tricks against vehicles, and the Deceiver's got some nice tricks with your deployment, but the Nightbringer, completely ignoring invuln saves and feel no pain saves, with his main weapon, which is the anti-tank weapon, I think that's really good when you're comparing all three of the Ctan shards. He's also got the flexibility as well of going anti-horde with his Reap and Sweep profile. Secondary objectives. So can your Ctan shard score secondary objectives? Yes, he can. Why can't he? And there's a few here that you can use when using a Nightbringer. The first one, of course, is Assassination. If he's going character hunting, getting 3 points per character killed, or 4 points if it's the Warlord, he can do that just fine. He can slice and dice or use his Ctan Powers if he really wanted to remove some character models. This one's better used on larger games, 2,000 point games. You're probably going to see a lot of characters there. The 1,000 point games, there might only be 2 at best, but you've got the option with the Nightbringer. Number 2 is Bring It Down, so he can be taking down monsters and vehicles quite comfortably. Again, they've got no invuln saves, they've got no feel no pain saves. He's dishing out a lot of damage, d6 for every single roll that gets through. He can be taking out virtually anything. So if you're taking Bring It Down, he's very much going to help with this one. Then likewise, Titan Hunter. If they're going up against Titanic units, he's going to have the same thing here. He's going to be slicing those down, pretty much no saves, a lot of damage. Okay, those models got a lot more wounds than a normal vehicle has, but you're going to be scoring 4 points for every Titanic model that goes down, 9 if you take down 2, and 13 if you take down 3. Now, are you going to take down 3? Probably not, don't get me wrong, but it's going to definitely help towards that when you're looking at the rest of the army as well. Then 2 more to mention here, no prisoners and grind them down. Now it's kind of the same thing here. It's an absolute killing machine, the Nightbringer. He's going to be scoring you points for any secondary objectives that relate to basically murdering your opponent's list. He's going to be one of the main guys doing this. So yeah, there's plenty of secondaries that the Nightbringer can help achieve army-wide. Now something I wouldn't use when you've got a Ctan shard is using to the last. He is inevitably going to die, and he is probably going to be the most expensive unit, or at least the top 3 expensive units within your list. So if he dies, you're basically losing 5 points for him. So I wouldn't use to the last when you're taking a Nightbringer. Other secondaries that are useful, Abba the Witch, of course, very similar to Assassination. He's going to be taking out characters, they're not going to have any saves. You can do that just fine. And he can also contribute in any of the Battlefield Supremacy options. So yeah, they're all just fine as well. Okay, so now we're on to the community reviews part of the video. So bring out a couple of reviews from the users on the Discord. So here's a couple for you. So we've got Azazel, very situational unit with the newer codices coming out. Against an army with only 1 or 2 phases that can hurt him, he's brilliant. But against a unit that can hurt him effectively in the shooting phase, psychic phase, charge phase, and fight phase, he can die very quickly. Worth spending command points to put him into strategic reserves, to protect him turn 1, and then bring him into turn 2 closer to the enemy. 7 out of 10. Then we got Hardacre. In my experience, the Nightbringer is the best all-round Ctan. He's an absolute monster in combat. Nothing has ever come close to the amount of damage he can bring. However, the cost is a lot. The Ctan as a whole though is situational, as he does get the work done. Some armies just can't deal with him, others can basically laugh in their face. 8 out of 10. So 2 pretty high reviews there of the Nightbringer from the Necron community. So that then brings me on to my final thoughts. So at the start of 9th edition, he was an absolute monster. I would have put him in the top tier, very comfortably in fact. But as the codex creep goes on, there's just units within the game that can do damage, do mortal wounds in all the phases, not just the 2 basic phases. So he can literally be removed from the table before he even gets a chance to do anything. Now the psychic phase in particular is a big one. There's a lot of psychic factions out there now, and that for me is his weakness. With only 9 wounds, he can take 3 in the psychic phase, he can take 3 in the shooting phase, 3 in the fight phase, and he's gone. If you're talking baseball, that's 3 and out. He's not going to be very effective against those kind of factions. He's also very slow. We've kind of touched on it already in this video. With only 8 inches, if you're chasing Mortarion across the table, you're not going to chase him if he's positioned correctly. Same goes to Magnus and a lot of the other big bads within the 40k universe. Now of course, if you do get first turn, this does increase your odds of getting him into a fight, because likely you're going to be 24 inches at the start of the battle. That's going to instantly go to 16 inches once he's done his movement. You don't want to advance him because then you can't use the Ctan Powers. The problem then is your opponent can simply drop back, whether it's 6 inches, 8 inches, whatever their movement is, they can just drop back, and your Katana's then got to make up that ground in the next movement phase if he's still alive. So for me, he needs to be in reserves. He needs to come out. Your opponent isn't going to know where he's coming out. You've then got a 9-inch charge. Okay, you might not make it. You do have an okay chance of getting that 9-inch off. But even if you don't, you're going to have to survive a turn anyway out in the open, maybe even 2 turns. This one does limit it down to 1 turn. You're still using the Ctan Powers as well, but your opponent isn't going to know where he's coming from. That's the main positive with doing this strategy. But once he does get into a fight, he's taking out anything. There's nothing surviving this thing. He's taking it out. No saves, no invuln saves, no fear, no pain saves. Even the 2+ armor saves go to a 6+. It's very unlikely anything's going to survive. I love the fact that he's got flexible weapons. He can go anti-horde or anti-tank, anti-character with his actual Ctan Powers. He can literally be taking on any opponent that he sees fit, as long as he can get hold of him. Now there are ways I'd like to improve the model because it is a bit outdated in terms of the actual model itself. I'd like to have seen him be on a larger base to match the Void Dragon. That's on a bigger base. I think it's an 80mm base, the Void Dragon. Much larger model, which means whatever direction he's going, he's got more surface area. I'd also like to give him a 12-inch movement as opposed to 8-inch, just to give him a little bit more speed. He needs it to get involved in a fight. I'd maybe even stick him in the Lord of War as opposed to the elite selections. Then we can get 3 of them within a super heavy detachment, rather than having to take 3 separate detachments, paying tax for a HQ and troops or whatever other options you're taking with that detachment. There's a tax involved if you're doing it that way. Then finally, 370 points for only 9 wounds is just not enough for me. I think it needs to have at least 12. That way it would at least almost guarantee him surviving first turn, especially going against a psychic army. That's definitely his nemesis. Either that or he just needs to be dropped down by about 70 points, put him on 300 points. You might say that's way too overpowered, but you look at the current codexes at the moment, you've got Tyrannies with those zone throats, throwing out mortal wounds for fun. You got the Tau just blasting things off the board with their railguns. There's so many worse problems within the 40k game to be worrying about than the actual Nightbringer that cost us 370 points. But for me, as for my stamp of approval today, I'm going to be giving him the competitive stamp. He's not top tier anymore for me. He can be got out very quickly. He can be removed and take off a lot of points from your army before you've even got to use it. So that's what I think. Let me know in the comments below what stamp of approval you would give the Nightbringer and why. Or if you want to use a rating system, just give me an out of 10 rating. That's totally fine. And also if I've missed any tactics, also just put them down below or just join the Discord and have a chat with us there. Other than that guys, all that's left to say, thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.